Okay, hi. Today we're going to be doing my September wrap-up. So first let's talk about stats for the month, so like books that came onto and off of my TBR, because I'm like trying to maintain my physical TBR a little bit better, reduce my TBR, which didn't happen this month, but we'll just talk through it. So just looking off at my laptop, I started out the month with 162 books on my TBR, on my physical TBR, which was the lowest I had it at the year. And then I bought 22 books because I went on vacation. Bought a lot of used books. Six of those books I had already read or bought a copy, or I was buying like a duplicate copy of, so it didn't like increase my TBR. And then I read 9 books off of my TBR. So I went from 162 at the beginning of the month to 169 at the end of the month, so it increased, which was to be expected when I bought a ton of books. But let's move on to what I actually read. So I participated in Bookopoly-thon, and I actually followed my TBR fairly well. I did have a few DNFs off of it, so we'll just go through that, and then we'll go through the books I read outside of that TBR. Okay, so the first prompt was humans, and for that I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I did this as a buddy read with Gina at Gina Standard Books, so I will link her down below. And I would say that the highlight of this book was the buddy read. So this book is a standalone fantasy novel about multiple kingdoms and queendoms, magic, and dragons. And that's really all I want to get into this video. I did do a full non-spoilers review of it, which I will link. So if you want more detailed thoughts and you are interested in reading this, I would suggest going to that instead. But my like very simple thoughts about this book is that this book was fun to read. It was really highly consumable, but it was overly simplified for the page count. The plot was fairly simplistic at its core. The characters for me fell fairly flat. And I felt that there was a specific character relationship and character development that was the focus of the authors, and everything else was like a plot convenience to try to get to what those characters needed to do. I found the ending contrived, and I felt that this book either should have been longer and had more detail and have a more fleshed out plot. And I think if that was done and that time was taken, it would have ended up with a different ending than it did. Or I think you could have gone for it to be shorter and removed a lot of the excess plot, removed a lot of these difficulties for your characters that they came away from so easily, and it would have been a better read. I finished the 800-page book. Obviously, I enjoyed it enough. I found it fun as I was reading it, but we were doing this as a buddy read, and so we were doing a lot of analyzing, and we found that there wasn't a lot of meat to grab onto thematically, and when you start to dissect the character motivations, when you just start to dissect the plot and how people ended up where they did, a lot of it really fell apart. So I had a lot of fun reading it as a buddy read, and I enjoyed that part of the experience, and I enjoyed the consumability of the plot, but I didn't find it to be like that good of a book. The second prompt I got for it was Who, which was like an obscure book, something no one's ever heard of, or that's like underhyped. And for that, I read What the Chickadee Knows, and this is a poem collection or a poetry collection by Margaret Newden. These are poems that are in Anishinaabe on one side and are in English in the other. And the foreword at the beginning explains that these were originally thought of in Anishinaabe, and then the author translated them into English. This is the only book I've ever found that has been translated in some capacity from an indigenous North American language. I would be interested if anyone knows of any others, if you could link it down below. I don't know how much I have to say about this because I don't feel like I read enough poetry to really understand and analyze poetry. You can sit down and read a poem multiple times to try to uncover the meaning of it, and it's just not something I'm kind of willing to do as a reader. I kind of just will read it and I'm just getting the very superficial view of it. And as far as my poetry tastes go, I prefer something more akin to something that feels more spoken word than it was made to be read versus made to be listened to. I prefer made to be listened to poetry. There are two sections to it. There are poems, What We Notice, and thematically I didn't quite understand what was going on with these. And then there were the ones that were history, and it was kind of going through a history from her lens as an Indigenous person. I found I liked this section because I liked the thematic element of taking the poetries as a whole together. Another thing that I liked about these is that, you could read these, I've been saying this wrong, in Anishinaabewin, or you could read them in English if you speak Anishinaabewin. I was kind of going through and I don't speak it, but I was reading it, kind of reading the flow of the Anishinaabewin sections, and then reading it in English, which is the one that I could understand. And then she has in the beginning a preface that kind of talks about how to pronounce vowels, which I appreciated, and talked about consonants that aren't used, and also talked to if you know both languages, she thinks it would be an interesting experience to see how she translated some of the words a lot differently into English. For next one, I got current events, and I was supposed to read The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I got about a third of the way into this when I decided to DNF it. This is a nonfiction, and it is about a time period in the 40s in Palestine where the book is arguing that there was an ethnic cleansing that was occurring of Palestinian people in Palestine by Zionists. The reason I DNF'd this isn't for the content, well, kind of. So I'm very picky with the type of nonfiction I like. This was very much about an event and the things leading up to an event or a time period. I typically do not enjoy that type of writing or that type of nonfiction. I generally prefer something that's more encompassing of a long period of time where I'm getting a lot of general information and not a lot of maybe necessarily super specific information. So that's my first reason for DNFing this. My second reason is the writing itself. It was academic. I don't know if I want to use that word. It was dry. I found my mind wandering as I was reading this, and I was listening to it as an audio, and I would get maybe a paragraph worth through, and my mind had already wandered, and I was having to re-listen a lot, and I was not engaged with the writing style at all. The third thing, which is something that I find with nonfiction sometimes, is that instead of the facts guiding me toward his thesis was provided and then backed up by facts. So I don't like that. I prefer when it's fiction or nonfiction that is written like this, that you give me your idea, you present information, and then you draw me to your conclusion. And it felt like it was happening in the reverse. I won't necessarily DNF a book for that, but I think all of those things together was just a recipe for me not enjoying this. So I want to put a different book about Palestine on my TBR, and I have looked into a few that are more like my style, the things I was talking about before, larger periods of time that they're talking about. So, as you can imagine, in trying to find books about this, the Goodreads sections of these were very polarized. So I think I'm just gonna have to go with the synopsis and see where it goes. So that was that book. Okay, next I got a chance card, and for that I pulled Rabbit Island. Rabbit Island is translated from the Spanish, and it is a short story collection. As I was reading it, it got longlisted for the National Book Award Prize for Translated Literature. I always find it interesting when short story collections get nominated for that, because they're always just gonna be kind of like a roller coaster of like, some are gonna be great and some might not be as good. So yeah, I just always find that interesting. So there is a lot of different types of things that are explored in this, and they're through a lens of like the surreal, I guess, where you take like this mundane or this normal and you add a layer that is not in a contemporary setting. I don't know if that makes sense. So you have the one where this woman is working at a hotel, and as she sleeps, she starts to have other people's dreams. You have another where a man starts going down a river and in a very urban area, and finds an island with rabbits on it and starts to interact with them. You have one where someone is looking desperately for a building to go to do something, and the building is unfindable. And that's like the type of vibe of these. So I don't know if I can say much, but they were kind of like my vibe of short stories. They were relatively short. I don't think any of them were over 30 pages. The setup would be relatively normal, and like things would kind of start to spiral, and it would get more and more strange as the short story went on, until you were left with this kind of like I don't want to say dissatisfaction, but it kind of just dropped you off at the end, and that was that. Like, now you get to paint the rest of what happened, or now you get to think about what I was trying to convey with this short story. So, as far as short story collections go, I really enjoyed it. It worked for me. I would recommend it if you were interested in it. Okay, so then we got Feed Scroll. And so I scrolled through my Goodreads and looked for a book, and it was What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours by Helen Oyeyemi. That was my other DNF. It was a short story collection that was supposed to be connected in some capacity. I've already talked about this in my last wrap up, but it didn't work for me. They were too long. It was like the opposite of the short story collection I just told you about. For the next one, I got POC Rep, and for that, I read The Break by Katharina Vermette. This was a intergenerational novel. So there were it was all taking place in the same time period, but you're following multiple characters among different generations of a family, and mainly focusing on the Métis women in this community, and a trauma that occurs, and kind of like the fallout of it, and how everyone comes to terms with it, and like the grieving process. So there's like this trauma that happens at the focus, and it's a crime, and so you're following the woman, the girl it happened to. She was a teenager. You're following her friend. You're following her mom. You're following her aunt. You're following her grandmother. You see her brother at times, and you're following the person who perpetrated the action and the person that's investigating the action. There are trigger warnings galore in this, so look them up before you read this. Like, there is an assault at the core of this, and there is like a description of it happening. So there's a trigger warning at the beginning of the book, like in the text, but I would just look into that because it is not a nice light book by any means. I really loved this book. I found that sometimes it's hard when you have a event at the center of the book that everyone is kind of following and you see a lot of different character perspectives, because it can get muddled and you can get duplicate information. I didn't feel that happened with this book. I felt that every character was very distinct. I felt that there was the focus on the trauma and the core of what this book is about. But then it's the interweaving, not just of them dealing with this trauma, but them just living their lives. And every character felt very full and had a lot of depth to them. And there were a lot of, I don't want to say side plots, but side character arcs that were happening through their interactions with each other through the course of the text. And there was a lot of connections between the non-related characters that were so seamlessly woven. It never felt overdone and it never felt heavy-handed. I just highly recommend this book if you can deal with the subject matter that is very dark. Following the antagonist as a main character was hard for me as a reader, and I appreciated it because the antagonist, the perpetrator, they weren't a good person, and I empathized with things that happened in their life, but I couldn't get over what they had done to truly empathize with them as a character. It also just speaks to intergenerational trauma in itself, on top of and how trauma is something that most people in the Métis community here have experienced. I found this just a really great read, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so the last one that was on the TBR was another chance card, and I got Human Acts by Han Kang. I actually am still reading that, so I'm not going to talk about it here, but I finished my TBR, so yay. Or I'm finishing my TBR. So let's talk about the other books I read outside of that TBR. So I read A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan. This is hyper millennial, and it is about two millennials, a couple, who work in dead-end jobs in New York City, and they are, as a couple, kind of obsessed with the male of the relationship's old coworker, and they follow her on social media. She's an inside joke part of their life, and then they run into her and start interacting with her. And the first half, it was satirical, and it was strange, and the dynamics of everything that was happening was sparse and uncomfortable, and I was so there for it. And then about 50% of the way through, there is a complete tonal shift, and it goes from being a contemporary satire to a contemporary horror. After a certain event happens, I don't want to say what it is, but after a certain thing happens, that's when the tonal shift happens. And it felt like it was the satire of the book, the author then turned into a metaphor and used horror as the lens to kind of portray it through. And it kind of fell apart for me. I think that the end of the book wrapped up what the author was trying to accomplish fairly well, but overall, I I was pretty disappointed by where the book went and kind of wished it had followed the same trajectory that it had had in the first half, because I was absolutely loving it. The characters are weird and they're not very nice, and there's a lot of really strange interactions, and I was totally there for it. Then I read The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. It's like a short book about a guy turning into a beetle. This is one of those books that I feel like there's such an interesting context and lens that you could read this through. I don't remember when it was written, but as I was reading it, I was kind of looking into like the background and the times, because I felt that the author was using this as a metaphor for society at the time. It felt like there was a lot of focus on critiquing society, critiquing relationships and familial roles, as like this person's family. He lives with his parents and his sister, and he turns into a bug, and it's like kind of how his family starts interacting with him. It just felt like he was doing a lot that I just didn't have the context for, because I had no idea what was going on when he was writing this, where he lived. And yeah, I enjoyed it for what it was, but I wish I had more context around it. And then I started reading like analyses of it. And because this book is old and famous, there's so many different ideas of what it all represented, and so many critiques and like what they thought this was. Like it was too much to get into. Like I was going too deep for a book that took like 3 hours, less than 3 hours to read. But I've finally read it, and it was weird, but I liked it. Next, I read Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I read The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This was a reread for me. I'm reading it with my partner currently. We are listening to the audiobooks. I'm enjoying my secondary read of this. So it's essentially like how everyone pitches it is like, we're 1,000 years after the Chosen One failed, and like we're living in the Empire where like darkness has taken over, and you're kind of following these band of folks trying to overthrow the Empire. And it's a fantasy that has like a very like interesting metal-based magic system at the core of it. And it was fun doing a reread. I love watching my partner's reactions to things as they're happening, and like twists and things that are to come. I found that I was picking up on a lot of allusions and references in my reread that I wasn't noticing in my first read. I just find this series so fun. I really love all the characters. The audiobook I find amazing. I love all of the accents that Michael Kramer does for all of the different folks in it. I love that some of the fantasy tropes kind of get turned on their head. I do have some qualms with it. I might do a full series review once I'm done with my reread. One of my qualms I have with the book is the structure. So there's a chapter, and then there's a reading from a text, and it's a diary entry, and then there's a chapter and diary entry, chapter diary entry. That's kind of how it goes. Sometimes the chapter breaks are in the middle of a scene, and then you have a diary entry, and it takes you out of the moment and is a bit jarring. As an editor, I would think that because you chose to put these diary entries in, you would wait until scene breaks for your chapter break. One thing I love about this series is that I personally have a really hard time with action scenes where there's fighting between characters. I have a hard time imagining the movements people are making. It just I read a scene and I know they're fighting, but I have no idea what's happening. I can't imagine it, and I can't imagine the kinetics of the body movements. I don't know if it's because the magic system and it requires a lot of physics or what it is, but I find these scenes so much easier to follow than typical fight scenes. So that's all I'm going to say about that at the moment. Then I read Slade House by David Mitchell. This is a short Ooh, that was my elbow cracking. This is a short horror novel, and it's basically like a haunted house tale. And it's basically like the house kind of takes in a victim every 9 years, and you kind of watch the victim come in. They're all in first person, and you follow multiple victims through time, like coming into this house. I thought it would get a repetitive, which it kind of does, but he kind of adds a little bit more each time and kind of unveils more of what is going on and kind of lets you in on the mystery. So in a way, I didn't find it that repetitive. David Mitchell's books are all connected by characters and like things that happen, plot points, and by the magic. So no matter what your reading order is with David Mitchell, you're always going to get a different experience than other people just based on when you meet characters. This has the magic system in it. So the magic of his Uber world or Uber novel, I think that's what he refers to it as, all of his books. The magic of his Uber novel is introduced in the Bone Clocks and is used in this book. So if you haven't read the Bone Clocks, this is going to be a horror novel with like ethereal like magic in it. Like you don't really know what's going on. It's just like, ooh, magic. Something's going on. There's like different kinds of powers and spirits. If you have read the Bone Clocks, you'll have more context for what these people are and why they do what they do. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I personally actually didn't like the Bone Clocks all that much. It was my least favorite of his books, but I'm slowly chugging along with him, and all I have left at this point is Number 9 Dream and Ghostwritten. So I think that if you don't read his books in general, but you want like a haunted house story, it's still enjoyable. But I would just be mindful that some of his characters are not nice people and like they're racist and like just phobic in all ways, and you read a first person point of view with that. And there's a lot of fatphobia in this, and one of your characters also has like decent amounts of internalized fatphobia, so just something to be mindful of. And then the last ones, I started reading The Chronicles of Narnia. It is the beginning of October, so at this point I have read books 1, 2, and 3. I am reading them in publication order and not the HarperCollins or whatever order. So I was looking up like how you should read this series because I've seen that there's multiple orders, and there is the order that most people my age know that the HarperCollins came up with, which is like a chronological order of Narnia or of, I don't know. They chose to make an order, and then there's like the publication order. And people who are very invested in the Chronicles of Narnia said, read it in publication order, which is what I'm doing. So I first read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then I read Prince Caspian, and then now I read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So far in the books, there's these 4 siblings, and they find a way into, it's like their portal fantasies, they find a way into this new world of Narnia, and like things ensue. The first book was the one most people are familiar with, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was, they're fun, they're fine. I started reading them with my mom when I was young, and we got bored, I think, at Prince Caspian and gave up. But reading them in like the HarperCollins order. So like even as a child, I wasn't like invested in these books. I feel that reading them as an adult, not having any nostalgia toward them, they don't hit for me. Like I'm already not a huge middle grade reader, and I don't read a lot of children's literature just generally speaking, and they fall a little flat, and I find them a little boring. It's kind of just like things are constantly happening, so like you're always pushing forward, but to me it's like too much is happening and everything is solved too easily. They're obviously written in the 50s, so they're generally fairly sexist There's like some racism in them. The voyage, like, I don't really know what to say about them because I feel bad kind of like beating on them because I know they're very beloved, but I think that I've liked them better as I've read. Like, I preferred Prince Caspian to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I preferred The Voyage of the Dawn Treader to Prince Caspian. But I still don't love them. Like, Prince Caspian, like, I just kept thinking, like, this is giving me colonizer vibes. Like, and I know it's a kid's book and they're going on an adventure, but, like, I don't know. It's just like, oh, I hope we get to an island and I hope there aren't savages on it. And there's like a very prevalent morality to these books. And it is a morality that I don't compute with. It just feels like C.S. Lewis's ideas about how the world works, how people should be, are just like so deeply entrenched in the works themselves, in how matter-of-fact things are when they happen. I kind of have now gotten to the point where in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I understand what Aslan represents, which took away some of the joy of it for me, honestly. Like, I know they're biblical, but yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep reading them because they're short. One thing I will say is that I read the series of Unfortunate Events when I was young. That's another series that I reread as an adult and just didn't think it aged that well. But anyway, I read those as a child, really liked them. And the writing style of these gives me flashbacks to the series of Unfortunate Events, even though they're totally different in plot. I'm reading these and I can't help but think that Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket, like loved these books as a child and was like heavenly influenced by them. But that's all I have for my reads of September. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you read. And until next time, happy reading.